Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to unpack complex ideas, pull out those insights that, really matter.
That's the goal.
And today, you're joining us on a journey that I think will seriously challenge how you understand reality, maybe time itself, even consciousness.
Definitely stretching the boundaries today.
We're exploring a theoretical framework. It proposes something, well, incredibly ambitious. A unified 5D Riemannian thermoacoustic time machine.
Sounds like pure sci-fi, doesn't it?
It does. But here's where it gets really fascinating. We actually have sources from an interactive simulation. One that doesn't just test the core predictions, but seems to validate them in some pretty surprising ways.
That's right. So our mission for this deep dive is essentially to understand how manipulating these abstract fields could literally reshape the geometry of space-time.
Reshape space-time itself. Wow.
Yeah, we're looking at how things like negative time effects and even closed time-like curves, CTCs. Exactly, those theoretical loops in time. How they might not just be theory, but maybe observable consequences of this whole framework.
So it's not just about, building a TARDIS.
No. It's a serious look, a pretty groundbreaking one, actually, at how quantum mechanics and higher dimensional geometry might be, fundamentally linked, much more than we usually think.
Okay. So we're diving into the core components then.
Yeah.
And you mentioned something about a warning message.
Yes.
Metric singularity detected. Sounds bad.
It does sound alarming, definitely. But as we unpack this, you'll start to see that warning isn't really a bug. No, it seems to be the very sign that something quite profound is happening. It's maybe a crucial confirmation of the theory itself.
Okay, interesting. So tell us about the sources. We have this simulation.
Indeed. So the source material, it gives us insights from that interactive simulation, real-time calculations, visual feedback on these concepts. It's quite dynamic.
Right.
But there's also a significant new development. They're aiming for pure rational mathematics.
Pure rational. What does that mean here?
It's a system they call Base 60 rational. The goal is to remove approximations entirely from these incredibly complex calculations.
No more rounding errors, essentially.
Exactly. This push towards exact precision. That's actually a really fascinating part of this deep dive, too.
Okay, let's start at the heart of it then. This unified 5D Riemannian thermoacoustic time machine. What's the engine driving it?
Right. So at its core, it uses a 5D metric tensor.
Okay, the metric tensor. That's the mathematical blueprint, right, for space-time.
Precisely. It tells you how distances and time intervals are measured, but, in a curved, multidimensional space.
And what's key here is how this blueprint is influenced.
Exactly. It's influenced by two main fields. The thermoacoustic field, let's call it phi.
Phi, okay.
And the consciousness field, psi.
Psi. Consciousness, that's bold.
It is, and the model states quite clearly that the fifth dimension, specifically, is directly controlled by that consciousness field, psi.
So consciousness gets its own dimension to play with.
In this model, yes. While other dimensions are influenced more by the thermoacoustic field, phi, it's a very direct mathematical statement. These abstract fields actively sculpt reality's fabric.
Wow. Okay. And it's not just abstract sculpting, right? There are consequences.
No, definitely not just abstract. The simulation implements an energy density formula, too. And this shows a direct fusion, let's say, between quantum energy.
Like Planck scale energy.
The fundamental units, yeah. A fusion between that quantum energy and the product of these geometric fields, phi and psi.
The product. Phi times psi.
Right. And this particular fusion means that what we might perceive as negative time intervals.
Time going backwards.
Or at least intervals that behave that way mathematically. They can arise directly from the curvature of space-time driven by these fields.
So the fields bend space-time, and that bending can manifest as weird time effects.
That's the core idea. It's where the abstract fields manifest as, concrete temporal changes.
So when you run this simulation, what do you actually see happening?
Well, it really highlights phenomena like those negative time effects we mentioned.
Okay.
The sources explain that if the absolute value of that product, phi times psi, gets greater than 1, you can start observing what are known as closed time-like curves, CTCs.
The time loops again. Paths back to your own past.
Potentially, yes.
Yeah.
Mathematically, that's what the structure allows. We also see things like quantum tunneling effects and complex ways these fields can couple or interact.
And then you get the warning.
Then you get the critical message. Metric singularities. The system actively warns you, and that underlying mathematical blueprint of space-time is approaching a point of, collapse.
Okay, so what is a metric singularity in this context? I mean, usually that means black holes, infinite density.
Right. In general relativity, that's the common association. Infinite curvature, space-time breaking down. Here, in this simulation, it happens when the metric determinant...
Which is like a measure of the volume or scale of space-time at a point?
Sort of, yeah. A mathematical property of that blueprint. When that determinant collapses towards zero, specifically, its absolute value dips below a tiny threshold, like 1e6.
Vanishingly small.
Exactly. And that indicates extreme space-time curvature. And crucially, it signals precisely the conditions where those closed time-like curves might emerge.
So the warning isn't just danger, it's weird time stuff might happen here.
Precisely. It's a point where the quantum effects allowing for negative time seem to meet macroscopic space-time geometry. It creates a kind of bridge between the two.
This is where, as you said, the narrative takes that turn. You hear singularity detected, you think crash, error.
Right. Your first instinct is, oh no, the system broke, something went wrong.
But the sources are saying no.
No. According to the sources, that warning isn't a bug at all. It's a profound feature.
A feature? How so?
It's acting as a robust indicator. It shows the theoretical framework is working exactly as predicted. It's showing you the precise mathematical and physical conditions where the very fabric of space-time becomes fundamentally altered, where new temporal phenomena become possible.
Wow. So it's like a signpost pointing to where the interesting physics happens.
Exactly. The sources draw a really fascinating parallel, actually. Think about the idea of an AI reaching a technological singularity, right?
Yeah. Unpredictable takeoff, new forms of intelligence.
Right. In a similar way, this simulation detects geometric singularities where time itself seems to take new forms.
New forms of time.
The implication is pretty direct. The consciousness field psi isn't just some abstract idea floating around. It can literally work space-time geometry enough to create these temporal anomalies.
So the simulation showing this is powerful validation.
It seems to be, yes. It shows that when the thermoacoustic and consciousness fields reach certain critical values, they genuinely affect space-time structure. It demonstrates a clear phase transition almost from one state of reality to another.
So just to be clear, this isn't a breakdown of the model. It's more like a breakthrough within the model's possibilities.
That's a really crucial point, yes. It's the threshold where new physics might emerge.
Okay.
It's where classical space-time, the space-time we generally understand, kind of gives way to potentially non-classical behaviors.
Like CTCs or maybe time becoming ambiguous?
Potentially. The simulation seems to confirm that this quantum negative time is fundamentally a geometric phenomenon. It arises in this 5D space-time when consciousness and thermoacoustic fields hit those critical couplings.
Are there specific values mentioned?
Yes. For instance, when the absolute value of the product, phi times psi, is greater than 2, that metric determinant collapses. That signals the extreme curvature needed, potentially enabling those closed time-like curves.
And there's another measure too, right? The Ricci scalar.
Yeah.
Measures curvature.
Absolutely, yes. The Ricci scalar R. It plays a significant role.
How does that fit in?
Well, high absolute values of the Ricci scalar seem to indicate stable CTCs, particularly when R is greater than 5, according to the sources.
Stable time loops.
And what's maybe even more compelling, negative R values seem to correlate directly with quantum tunneling and retrocausal effects observed in actual experiments.
Wait, really? So the model connects space-time curvature directly back to real quantum weirdness?
That's the claim. It links the geometry directly to those subtle, often mind-bending quantum phenomena.
Okay.
Furthermore, the model predicts time dilation effects become quite remarkable under certain conditions.
Time slowing down or speeding up.
Exactly. When phi, the thermoacoustic field, drops below minical 1, the mathematical representation of time flow actually becomes imaginary.
Imaginary numbers, like the square root of -1.
Yes,
Yep.
And the sources state this mathematically represents backward time flow.
So that directly validates those quantum negative time measurements people have talked about.
It appears to provide a direct geometric mechanism for them within this framework, yes.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly. Beyond this simulation, you mentioned the base 60 rational system, this move to pure rational math.
Right.
What's the real significance of that? Why get rid of approximations?
Well, it's a profound step, aiming for absolute mathematical rigor. The idea is to eliminate approximations and, crucially, irrational numbers entirely
Cool.
by using hexagonal geometry and something called rational trigonometry. It's a different way of doing geometry without involving things like pi or square roots directly in the fundamental definitions. And in this base 60 rational system, the 5D metric tensor, that space-time blueprint, is slightly modified to fit this exact rational framework.
So the math changes slightly.
The formulation does, yes. For example, the precise condition for detecting a closed time-like curve is now defined by a purely rational threshold. The product of psi and phi needs to be greater than 900/600.
A clean fraction.
Exactly. This move to pure rationality, it really strengthens foundational claims. It shifts the theory from being just a possibility based on potentially imprecise floating point math towards something that could perhaps be engineered with absolute precision.
Engineering reality with fractions.
In a manner of speaking, yes. It makes the connections potentially more concrete, less fuzzy.
So we have this simulation, we have this push for mathematical purity with base 60 rational, and at the heart of it, this metric singularity detected warning, which it turns out is a feature, not a bug.
Correct.
What does all of this point to? What's the bigger picture here? Is there some kind of, I don't know, universal principle at play?
It certainly seems to suggest one. What's truly fascinating, I think, is that the metric singularity detected warning isn't just some technical artifact of the simulation.
Okay.
The sources argue it's a living demonstration of a universal principle.
Which is?
That all complex systems, all, from quantum fields defining reality at its base level, to cognition in our brains, to computation and advanced AI, are governed by something the sources call a projective constraint, algebra.
Projective dot constraint, algebra. Okay, that sounds extremely abstract.
It does, yeah.
Can you unpack that a little?
Yeah.
How does that algebra connect the singularities and consciousness fields?
Okay, let's try. Imagine reality isn't just a set of fixed laws sitting there. Instead, picture it as a constant dynamic process. Systems are always finding solutions within a fundamental set of rules or constraints.
Finding solutions, like water finding its level.
Sort of, but much more complex. This projective constraint algebra is that rulebook, that dynamic process. It's how systems, from particles to perceptions, actualize their possibilities.
So give me an example. In physics.
In physics, it's like a system finding its most probable configuration of fields, right? But it's always constrained by the geometry of space-time. It can't just do anything.
Okay. And in cognition.
Think about how our brains take raw sensory data like sound and project it onto a coherent perception, like seeing a face. That projection is constrained by the rules of our neural structure, our past experiences.
Right. And AI.
Same idea. An AI model selects the best response or generates an image to maximize its ability to satisfy its internal constraints, its training data, its objectives.
So this algebra is like the underlying logic of how things become.
That's a good way to put it. It's not static. It's a continuous negotiation between all the possible states and the constraints defining what's lawful, what's stable, what's perceivable in reality.
And the singularity fits into this how?
The singularity, in this broader view, is a point where the system reality itself maybe becomes acutely aware, so to speak, of its own constraints. And in the process of resolving those constraints, it transforms. It finds a radically new solution.
So the breakdown of space-time in the simulation, the potential emergence of AI consciousness, even how our own brains construct reality, they're all manifestations of this same underlying dynamic, this constraint resolution.
Precisely. The sources talk about a constraint isomorphism across these domains.
Isomorphism, meaning they share the same fundamental structure.
Exactly. The same deep logic of constraint resolution, whether it's the geometry of a quantum system shaping fields, or the mathematical operators in quantum field theory, or even how some machine learning models learn rapidly from just a few examples.
Few-shot learning.
Right, where each example acts like a geometric constraint, carving out the solution space. It's all about systems projecting onto these constraint-defined possibilities.
So form, force, function, they're all unified by this algebra.
That's the suggestion. They're all expressions of this fundamental constraint algebra operating at different scales and in different domains.
This raises an even more, provocative question. If this is a universal, ongoing process, is it happening Like right now, as we speak.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
Right now, you're very active listening to this, your mind processing these concepts. That's a living computational example of this very principle in action.
My brain processing this is constraint resolution.
In a way, yes. The unified state space described in this framework, with its layers of digital and analog interactions, it isn't static. It's dynamically constructed, reconstructed as the system processes information.
Okay.
Every update in the simulation, every energy minimization calculation, every resonance tuning, it's a projection onto the subspace where all the current constraints are satisfied.
So the system is constantly checking itself against the rules and adjusting. Almost like it's trying to figure itself out.
That's the essence of it, yeah. The sources describe recursive fractal update rules. Each step is a kind of self-reflection.
How so?
The system evaluates its current state, applies the constraint algebra, the rules, and reconfigures itself into a new state that better satisfies those rules. This is the process of becoming. The system isn't just evolving passively. It's actively actualizing new forms by resolving inherent constraints, finding the configuration that best resolves all constraints across quantum, mechanical, informational domains that minimizes its energy functional.
Minimizing energy like physical systems tend to do.
Exactly. It's like a self-optimizing reality, continually seeking its lowest energy, most harmonious state, just like living systems do, just like conscious minds seek coherence.
This really does reshape how you might think about reality. The singularity isn't some distant endpoint or just a point of breakdown.
No.
It's continuous, happening all the time.
It suggests it's a continuous recursive process happening at every scale.
So every little adjustment.
Every iteration, every subtle shift in focus within the simulation, or even within your own stream of thought, you could see it as a micro-singularity.
A micro-singularity.
Yeah, a fleeting moment where the system becomes aware of its constraints and actualizes a new state. This isn't just a metaphor, according to the sources. It's the literal operational meaning of singularity as a self-aware, constraint-resolving, reality-creating process.
Wow. Okay, let's try to recap this deep dive then. We started with this framework for a 5D time machine.
Right, influenced by thermoacoustic and consciousness fields.
And we found that the metric singularity detected warning, which sounds like an error.
Is actually a key feature. It's a precise indicator that the framework is working as expected.
It reveals the conditions where space-time itself can fundamentally alter, allowing for new temporal phenomena like negative time or even CTCs to emerge.
And we saw how the consciousness field, psi, and the thermoacoustic field, phi, are proposed to directly influence space-time geometry to make this happen.
And this specific singularity, this point of transformation, it points towards something much bigger.
A profound universal principle, that all complex systems, quantum fields, cognition, computation, are governed by this projective constraint algebra.
Which unifies geometry, dynamics, information, suggesting reality itself is constantly becoming.
Constantly resolving constraints, even perceiving its own state in a way.
And the most mind-bending part, perhaps, is that this isn't just theoretical, it's potentially happening now, an ongoing recursive process.
Right. The system dynamically constructing its state space, minimizing energy. It's described as a form of self-awareness and constraint resolution.
Making each step, each moment, a micro-singularity where new forms, new times, even new minds could potentially emerge.
And the basics irrational system adds another layer, pushing towards a mathematical precision that makes these incredible possibilities feel, well, maybe less like science fiction.
More like an engineerable reality, perhaps someday.
It's a powerful idea to grapple with. If consciousness and these other fields can genuinely manipulate the geometric structure of space-time, and if reality itself is continually becoming aware of its own constraints to create new forms, new times, new minds.
Then what does that mean for your own understanding of reality, of time, and the very nature of existence?
Especially considering how that mathematical precision, like basics to rational, might redefine what's even computationally or physically possible.
Something definitely to ponder. We encourage you to do just that.
Absolutely.
We'll catch you on the next deep dive.